Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Of course, here with Alan, a new face, usually Randall. I know we're getting a little insight here from the CEO today. Kind of wanted to give people a behind the scenes little intro, learn more about Alan. Also have a little Q&A session at the end, some questions that we've been seeing about Phunware. But first
Sure.
things first, Alan, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. I always say, like, after the military, much like Randall went through with me, we served separately. But if you get to eat, sleep, you'll see your family because you're not traveling and no one's shooting at you. Like, life's pretty good.
Hey, that's pretty easy way to put it. Well, awesome. Well, here, I know we want to start it. I know Randall started from where he went to school. If maybe we want to keep things similar, we'll start with that. Where you went to school, first kind of jobs. I know military is going to be in there.
Right,
So
right.
if you want to kick it off.
Yeah. So, I shouldn't be here. Like, being a NASDAQ CEO, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. So I was, born in New Jersey. My father was a mason, so did very hard manual labor with block work, brickwork, and all the rest. And it turned out, living in New Jersey, when he got out of the military, he started having really bad problems with arthritis. And so he went to the doctor, and they said, you know what? You need to go where it's warm and where it's dry. So without anyone in our family knowing anyone, I was like probably 3 years old at the time. They picked up and we moved from New Jersey to Arizona. And that was my introduction to the Southwest and the deserts and super hot and super dry. But it was great for my father's health at the time. And so when we showed up there, it was literally, my dad didn't have a job at all for, he tried for more than a year. It was a real battle to kind of enter in to a new area. My parents didn't go to college. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I had two older brothers. And so the first part of it was kind of challenging. We started off at a trailer park. My dad was really struggling to find work. And then he finally found a job. And then we ultimately were able to move from there into our first home in Tucson. So I kind of, never grew up not realizing I didn't have a lot. My parents were great, and my older brothers were fantastic, but I went K through 12 through the same school district. And ultimately my mom took a job as an assistant, at one of the schools, started at the elementary and moved to the middle school. So we just kind of were taught growing up, like, stop feeling sorry for yourself, get off your butt, put in the work. You can be anything you want in the United States. This is the greatest country in the world, and you have to work for it. And no one owes you anything, and life isn't fair. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, get off your butt, and make it happen. And so, with that as kind of a backdrop of putting us into sports, really focusing on school, I realized that school was my way kind of out of, I always had a goal that I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. I didn't know what that meant or how that would be possible, but I wanted to go out and try to prove that I could do it. And I also didn't grow until I was 19 after my freshman year of college. So the funny part, when I was back at that point, I think when I was getting my license, 16 years old, I was 5'1", 103. And then I managed to get up to about 5'4", 115, I think, by the time I was 18 and graduating high school. But I did really well in middle school and high school. And I ended up graduating first as class valedictorian and met a lot of people a lot smarter than me. I met very few that were willing to put in the sacrifice or the work. When you hear about entrepreneurs, what you find over and over and over again is, I'm always at an advantage because you care about sleeping. I don't. You care about eating food. I really don't care. Even people I work with hate traveling with me because they're like, he'll go through breakfast, through lunch, and, Monday through Friday, outside of some coffee, I don't care if I eat until dinner. And so when I see that, I spent a lot of time, and I was fortunate enough by being first in my class to get some scholarship offers. Randall went to West Point. I had a congressional appointment to go to West Point. I came this close to going to West Point, but I had a brother before me who went right out of high school into the Navy nuclear power program. And he told me, look, I've seen all these folks that are amazing in the military. if you went to an academy versus ROTC, how you perform is what's going to matter. So in my case, I applied to Army, Air Force, Naval, ROTC. I had a congressional recommendation actually from Senator McCain from Arizona at the time to go to the Air Force Academy. And then Representative Colby gave me a nomination and I got an appointment to West Point. But at the last minute, I got this weird postcard in the mail from the University of Miami. And they said, hey, if you use your ROTC scholarship at Miami, we have a program where we'll pay your room and board. And I was like, wow, like never even considered going to Miami. I ended up deciding to just take a trip out by myself. Didn't have a lot of money. So my parents put me on a plane to go visit for 1 week over spring break, my senior year of high school. And it was amazing. So I thought, wow, it's kind of small, it's private. And I loved, hurricane football. This was the U in the 80s after all. And so as a result of that, I ended up going to Miami. And by going there, it was ROTC. I had to give, military service when I graduated. I got a whopping $100 a month. So that was eye-opening because the wealth of South Florida and the students, that would show up. I went to college with some of the most amazingly fortunate folks in the world that were from the right families, and I had nothing. But I realized the one thing I always had was a desire to perform and a desire to succeed. And all the money in the world wasn't going to help somebody beat me in the classroom. So when I went to Miami, I had a blast. I joined Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity. It was kind of hard to get in, honestly, because at the time, I was still at this point like 5'5", 115. They literally thought I was like 12 years old. It was one of those bizarre things where I finally, they said yes, they let me join. I went to my first ever college party. It was 2 Live Crew, if you've ever heard 2 Live Crew, one of the preeminent kind of obnoxious, rapper groups from South Florida. And it was a toga party, so it was like a sheet and a smile.
Yep.
And Live Crew singing live, and I'm like, wow, welcome to Miami. And this because I also didn't drink at the time. My whole first year, I think I was probably the only one who never had a drink. And so I just got a wild.
You're in a frat, you're 5'5", and you don't drink.
Right.
Okay,
you should have saw my pitch to try to get a date. It was kind of like, look, I know you don't want to be with me. I know I'm probably like your little brother, but you don't want to embarrass yourself with that guy you really want to be with. So hang out with me. You don't even have to be nice to me, but hell, I can help you out. You don't have to embarrass yourself, and then you can get that guy you really want. So it was a fun time.
Use me as a stepping stone. Ouch.
Exactly. So that was a great time, and I have a huge passion for the U and for Miami. But I did so well there in industrial engineering. I graduated with honors from the industrial engineering department. I was top of my class in both industrial engineering and military science. And I ended up getting really wonderful opportunities to be able to go to graduate school as a result. So I got into Stanford, I got into Berkeley, I got into Georgia Tech. I was granted an educational delay from the US military. I was commissioned as a pilot. I was supposed to be an aviator flying Apache helicopters in the military. And then I ended up taking a scholarship and I went to Georgia Tech, which for the last 20 years in my field has been the #1, school in the world. And I went there because Berkeley.
Were you any taller when you accepted this?
I finally, when I grew, I forgot to tell you, when I was 19 after my freshman year, I went from that 5'4", 5'5" to 6'1", 110, 115 to 185. And fast forwarding later, when I finally did my 10-year high school reunion, it was funny that all these kids I grew up K through 12 together, nobody knew who I was because they hadn't seen me in 10 years while I was off, at Miami and then Georgia Tech. And then I entered the military. But the only bad part was, so Randall and I both had the military experience, him in the Middle East, me, I'll come to it in a minute, but I was more Asia and Pacific theater. But what was amazing is that because I ended up with 2 engineering degrees, they pulled the needs of the Army. They yanked my pilot slot. They put me in the Corps of Engineers, then sent me to Ranger School. So I had to go through that. So I ended up becoming an airborne air assault ranger in the Corps of Engineers. And my first assignment, I was deployed to the DMZ for the 1994 nuclear weapons inspections in North Korea. So it's kind of like, welcome to the real world. It was Kim Jong-il before Kim Jong-un. And it was a mess all the way back in 1994, but that was literally like my first job. And so when you're, 22, 23 years old and you have people older than you that you're leading, and they're like, hey, sir, is this going to be all right? And this is getting pretty intense. And, you're a human being. You're probably scared as well, but you're supposed to make sure you're prepared, lead, do what you need to do. And I found that probably Randall and I do so well in this environment because you never had enough men or enough time or enough training. You're always put into horrible situations and you had to just figure it out. Much like when you skydive, you have the rest of your life to figure out how to pull the chute. You get a lot of those in the military. So it gives you good context, amazing experience. And so I served and thought I'd stay in for years and ultimately got recruited to Silicon Valley by accident. Like I shouldn't even been in technology. I should have never got out of the service. But I was at a San Francisco airport and I was with my wife at the time and we were going to meet her family for the first time and we were having a drink at a bar. And I don't even know what we were talking about, but I had short hair. Now I'm like old and gray and losing my hair. But, some recruiter came up and said, hey, would you miss your flight? I thought I was being punked. You remember back when they had the punk show? I was like, what do you mean? Would I miss my flight? I'm like, no, I got to go back to Hawaii. I was now at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And I'm like, I got to get back to the military. And they're like, oh, no, we'll pay for your flight. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, we'd like you to interview with this Canadian company called Northern Telecom. Do you know anything about them? And I'm like, well, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and they sponsored the, Northern Telecom Tucson Open for the PGA. And I'm like, so I don't know anything about it. And they're like, well, could we have you interview before you go and just kind of hear them out? And I'm like, well, I don't know anything about what they do. And they're like, that's okay. I'm like, well, where would I stay? And they're like, we'll get you a hotel. I'm like, how would I get there? And like, we have a driver for you. And just sitting there like going, are you kidding me? I'm like, well, what would my wife do? And she's like, well, we'll give her some money and she can go shopping. And you finally run out of all reasons of saying no. So I finally broke down, said yes. I took a car from San Francisco airport to Santa Clara. I interviewed for a whole day, told them how horribly bad idea it was because I had to serve for another like 18 months in the military. And lo and behold, by the time I left, went back to Hawaii, on my doorstep was a job offer to go to Silicon Valley.
So you get recruited somehow in an airport bar or something to become a, massive tech guy in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, well, it's weird. Like I showed up, and you show up your first day at work and you realize like these guys were really smart in retrospect. They knew we didn't know how much money we were worth. So our base salary was way better than the military, but much lower than Silicon Valley.
Got it.
We didn't really get bonuses, so we didn't know any better. We didn't ask for stock because we didn't know options were a thing. And they knew that the military paid your relocation and they gave you like a couple $1,000 sign-on bonus and you think like you're a millionaire, right? And so it started that way. And then you show up day one and like, hey, do you know the difference between circuit switching and packet switching? And you're like, I didn't even know those were called circuit switching and packet switching. But you're sort of trying to learn how telephone systems work and key systems and PBXs and all that. And so it turned out I was part of an experiment at Nortel where 50 of us, 49 out of 50 were ex-military officers from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. And they hired all of us, brought us to Silicon Valley, and put us in charge of operations, even though none of us had ever been in telecom or networking our whole life. And what happened is it was probably the greatest assembly of talent I'd ever seen. And then simultaneously, inside the company and outside, that department was rated. I ultimately was promoted into a product manager for Nortel globally. Others were hired away by other companies like Cerent, which then became a $6 billion acquisition by Cisco Systems. Some went to Shasta, then Nortel bought them and they came back. One went and helped build Salesforce from the ground up. And many went on to become, founders and CEOs and CTOs of some of the most profound companies of our time. And it all started from this accident because they were trying to find a bunch of military people to come join, and you were thinking, wow, I've only got to work like 10, 12 hours a day. This is great. I get a weekend off. This is wonderful. And so while I was there, I kept getting, accused of being an engineer. So I did an MBA at Berkeley as well. So I worked full time. I went to school at night at Berkeley. I went all the way up to Berkeley and back for 2.5 years, got an MBA. And then the CTO, co-founder of Phunware, Luan Dang, my Vietnamese twin, he ran global development when I ran global product management. And when I finished my graduate degree at Berkeley, he finished his graduate degree in computer science at Stanford. And so he and I then kind of bonded, became a group. And then for whatever reason, you're in the Valley and you're supposed to start, a company. So he and I ended up, we were going to have 5 founders. It turned out that 3 chickened out. He and I became the founders of our first company called Vovita Networks, which is the first 2 letters of voice, video, and data. And he and I pledged our houses as collateral for our Dell equipment to build a voice over IP switching company from the ground up on Linux before anyone heard of Linux. And that ultimately we built and sold it to Cisco. It went from 0 to 9 digits in 20 months. And profoundly altered all of our lives forever by having this successful sale to one of the preeminent networking equipment companies in history.
Okay. So incredible story so far. I'm still digesting it. I know people watching are as well. So, okay, you sell a company to Cisco. Insane. So you find this guy, you're basically a friendship bond of where Nortel selects a bunch of guys that are similar. Obviously you guys connect, you guys are good friends, you guys start a company, you then sell it for 9 digits to Cisco. And then what's going through the head after? So now where we're gonna have some fun. How do you find motivation as an entrepreneur that's so successful? And I say this kind of knowing the answer. Some people say it's like the entrepreneurship virus. Walk me through. So you sell it, and then what?
Yeah, so we sell it and we become part of the voice technology group at Cisco. You go from, having very modest, net worth, and you're working hard like lots of people are. You catch lightning in a bottle, and suddenly you realize that a 5 or 10 cent move in Cisco's stock price is worth more money than you make in your base and bonus for an entire year because you get a concentrated stock position. What it was like, to both make a lot of money. We saw the conversion at like $53, and we were accused of doing the last deal in Silicon Valley after the tech bubble. It was November 2000. The bubble started popping about March of that year. You become worth all this money. By the time you get your stock certificates back then, it wasn't digital, so you'd have all this manual process. Cisco stock slid from like $53, ultimately all the way down to about $44 before we even got our securities, and then went all the way down ultimately to like a single digit midget and dropped below 10 briefly. So you both had a lot, lost a lot, kept a lot. We started, selling some stock and redeploying it into angel investments. So I put the first money into a company called Minex Holdings, which you would know as Vonage. Then I put money through helping out Vlad and Vlad at Ring Central. I helped them do an acquisition, and they were nice enough to let me, get a warrant and buy some stock. So I invested in Ring Central, which is today, I think, I haven't looked, but it's probably $434 a share. My cost was 5 cents. 5 cents. Now I had to wait about 20 years for all that, but they're awesome. Now they're a $40 billion company. And so he started sort of redeploying money. And when I did the first company with Luan, we were an SV Angel portfolio company. That's the original Silicon Valley Angel Fund. Bob Bozeman, Casey McGlenn, and everyone who knows Ron Conway. The super angel, the godfather of Silicon Valley angel investment, much like Mr. Valentine, always Mr. Valentine, founder of Sequoia.
So question for you, and sorry to cut you off. Like what,
Yeah.
talk to me about your love. I mean, what feels like a love for tech. I mean, I'm listening to this story. I'm like waiting for like, I was a super nerd. I love doing this. That hasn't happened yet. Was it just, obviously been in Silicon Valley? Is it just, hey, I'm in the heart of tech startups and that's just what I kept seeing? Or is it I love technology. I saw where things were going. Talk to me about like, what you were seeing.
So what's weird about it is, like when he showed up out of the military, like in August of 1996, when I came to Silicon Valley, I had never been on the internet. I didn't know what the internet was. Like we didn't even have like real cell phones at this point, right? You barely had pagers. So, when you show up, like obviously the internet and Netscape and all that started in 94, 95, 96. But when I showed up in the Valley, it was like, I was one of the first 10 employees of Nortel on a PC because they used Apple. They're like, oh, just hop on Apple Talk. And I'm like, I'm on a PC. Like, what do I do? I can't, you couldn't send PowerPoint to each other. It didn't work, right? So you're back in this era where, like, honestly, the reason I was able to figure out the kind of idea for our first company was not because I was a tech weenie. It was more because I didn't know any better. Like when you're forced to learn like circuit switching and packet switching at the same time, and you have no preconceived notion of the way it's supposed to be, and you've never seen the internet. When you think of the internet, now it's like talking about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or something. Like when you've never seen it before, you really don't know any better. So then you start looking at people around you, and everyone in the Valley is starting companies. So you don't realize the risk of what that means. You don't realize how many fail, but you're like, oh, everyone else is doing it. You're supposed to do this. So you come up with this idea, you dive in the deep end of the pool and you hope you can swim. And then you start doing these, like, I don't know, natural acts, like pledging your house as collateral for things. And you realize in retrospect that it's probably good when you're young. You don't really know any better. And even your risk profile is a little different, right? Like when you first get married and even before you have kids, or if you're single, like if you lose everything, the concept of what you really lost is not quite the same as every 10 years that passes. And now
It's why people say if you're going to start something, do it, pretty much when you're right after school. Worst case, you lose a few $1,000 and, a year of your life when you're in your 20s isn't too much. But no, hey, I'll ask you what goes into a successful entrepreneur in a sec. Talk to me about, so how does Phunware come up? So, you're throwing money in a bunch of places. You're talking about kind of doing some angel investing, and now where does Phunware show up?
Yeah, so what's interesting is actually, so we founded Phunware 10 years to the day.
Wow.
February 23rd, 2009, which was exactly 10 years after February 23rd, 1999, for Vita Networks, as we founded Phunware. And Luan and I, we during that window in the middle, we worked together at Cisco for a while still. We both had moved from Northern to Southern California, so we're now in Newport Beach. We've done some investing. We're, helping people with creating new ideas, new companies. We're doing all that normal kind of stuff. And then we kind of look and we're seeing, along comes the iPhone. And 2008, right in the summer, about 6 months before we start Phunware, out comes the iPhone. And we're like, oh my God, like I've seen this before. This is what I remembered going from circuit switching to packet switching, where it wasn't, it wasn't a bridge or a transition from the old to the new. it was a forklift. Like when you went to voice over IP through Ring Central, Vonage, Skype, you and I talking here through Zoom, when WebEx, all these systems, this is all voice over IP, right? But back when we started doing that back in the day, like that was heresy. Oh my God, you're going to use Ethernet. You can't do that. Haven't you seen how amazing the circuit switch phone system of Ma Bell, and all these old systems were? So we said, we've seen this before. It's not a bridge, it's a forklift. And in our case, we said, do you realize there's 5 billion feature phones, those little flip phones, and no one's going to bridge to a smartphone. You're just going to throw them all in the garbage can. So we said, aha, I've seen this before. So we said, let's set up a company that does everything you need to succeed on mobile. And we're going to build an entire infrastructure for business to business, the Fortune 5,000 and governments, to standardize on our stuff so that they can have applications that engage and manage and monetize their audiences on these new devices. And at the time, we didn't know there would be an Android ecosystem. We didn't know there'd be tablets and wearables and smart televisions or in-car infotainment. But when we started, we sure knew there was an iPhone. And we suddenly realized, hey, the carriers aren't in charge anymore. Now it's up to you and me. Like, what do we like? And we can put anything on our phone we want. It's not about ringtones and all this, like what was on deck from carriers. Like you and I could legit just pick whatever we loved. And so what we did is the vision was, I want to get a Phunware ID for every human being on earth with a device touching a network through their favorite brands and applications that run our software. That's it. And when I first went back to Silicon Valley and Luan and I said that, they looked at us like we were insane. Oh my God, you're going to reach everyone on the planet? How arrogant, how obnoxious, And so the fun part now is when we look back 12 years later, we now have over 15 billion Phunware IDs, up from 0 when we made that bold statement. And everyone said, no, you're trying to be everything to everyone. You'll be nothing to anyone. And we said, you know what? We'll believe you as soon as our customers stop paying us. And so we just kept diving in what we call the passion verticals, media and entertainment and sports. So Phunware, like, where did we learn how to build our platform? Doing NFL mobile, doing NASCAR, doing the Summer and Winter Olympics, the Oscars, the Grammys, WrestleMania. And then we built and actually own the patent for the companion television app. So when you now see direct to consumer like Disney Plus or Netflix, we own the patent for creating branded experiences on mobile. And we actually launched and built the first ever OTT application in the world, direct to consumer, that was called WWE Network. In the world of going in circles, I actually went to college with Dwayne Johnson before he was The Rock.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. So Dwayne would come to our fraternity house and eat all the time because he couldn't get on the field because the two guys in front of him turned out to be NFL Hall of Famers, Warren Sapp and Russell Maryland.
He's got a legendary story of his football hopes and dreams, and then obviously becoming an actor. So
and as you know, he ended up in Canada.
He ended up with the BC Lions. Yeah.
So Dwayne's awesome. It's great. It all worked out for him just fine, obviously. And
yeah.
But it's great to see that, we tried to figure out how do you create the most amazing experiences on the planet for all of us. And then ultimately over time, we took what we built for corporations in software. It's a lot like if only Amazon AWS focused on the digital transformation and mobile needs of the Fortune 5,000, that would be what Phunware is. And because nobody in Silicon Valley believed you could do all this with one company, they funded no competitors. They funded point solutions, that just did content or just did analytics or just did this
So
or
talk to me about the founding process a little, and this will lead into an interesting question. So when you're creating a business, is this you just being trend aware and saying, where are we going to be in 10 years? I'm looking at the original iPhone, and I remember when Cube Runner was the app everyone talked about,
yeah.
just to date myself. And you just do a little lean, but were you just like, wow, okay, this is where the world's going? Of course you didn't know there's going to be Android and all this stuff, but is that what goes through your mind, or was something else going through your head?
Yeah, no. So the good news is that when we bet the company early on at Phunware, we bet the company on native mobile applications, and we bet the company that nothing built for the internet would port to the mobile web or mobile applications. And then early on, we saw, Apple and Apple's hatred for others. Realized that, you know, when you think back of a lot of the things that have happened with Apple iOS over the years, when Steve Jobs was alive and subsequent to that, everything in the history of the iPhone, all the way through the software that operates it, has all been about getting even with some people in Silicon Valley. Because obviously Eric Schmidt of Google was on the board of Apple. Steve Jobs always thought that he stole all their ideas and understanding by being on the board to know about iOS, and actually then used Android to try to go after and hurt them. So that angered Steve Jobs so much that he said, how do I destroy Google? And he came up with two ideas and then a third before he died. The first two ideas were, how do I destroy Google's dominance in search? So what did he do? As you know, they actually put apps, not the mobile web, at the forefront. A native iOS application will always be faster, better, more engaging, easier to use than anything on the mobile web through Safari or Chrome. Why? Because Apple didn't want Google's search dominance on the internet to port into the world of mobile. Secondarily, along the way, they said, where else does Google make all of its money outside of search? Advertising. So what did they do? They banned advertising in iOS on where? The desktop, the mobile web, but not native mobile applications. And why did they do that? Because that, again, would cause great pain to Google. And when you look at the releases over time, those were the first two operational things. And now, as you know, Google pays billions to Apple every year to be the search default on your device. But they sure weren't going to do it for free. And advertising, you can have pop-up blockers on advertising for your desktop and your mobile web, but you sure can't do it for native applications. So those were the two things he did before it was leading into his death. The third he did because he knew he was going to die. The third thing he did is he left $1 billion for Tim Cook and all the executives and Sir Johnny Ive to blow up and destroy Google. And they would vest $1 billion over 10 years of service to Apple to cause as much damage to Google as humanly possible because of the thievery that happened when Eric Schmidt was on the board of Apple.
It's funny when you hear about how what's the word, petty, I don't know the word. I mean, I think it's more than petty, but even Elon Musk has some great stories too about him and
Sure.
his stuff. But no, so incredible. Talk me through an interesting question that I just have to ask as someone who's obviously now the CEO of a multi-million dollar company on the NASDAQ. Talk me through what goes into a successful entrepreneur. And maybe in a shortened version, just a few minutes, you talk about giving up sleep and giving up meals. Is there anything else that kind of go into that?
Yeah, so me and Luan are sort of kindred spirits where, he was the eldest Asian son of a Vietnamese family that was very well off, but he escaped Vietnam when the North took over the South. Him and his sister was pushed onto a boat floated in the ocean, ended up getting, discovered by a US naval destroyer off of Thailand, brought to the United States with absolutely nothing because all the wealth of the family was taken. He was the eldest Asian son. And his welcome to America was being one of 18 people in 1,000 square foot with one bathroom in New York. And when you ask, like, what got me out of bed in the morning was I wanted to be successful. I wanted to provide for my own family and show that this is America and you can accomplish anything. And Luan, as the eldest Asian son, I didn't know this for years and years and years of us being together, profoundly was motivated by having every asset stripped away from them, everything taken, starting from nothing, which I can relate to. And we both came from different scenarios completely with the same chip on our shoulder to get out of bed in the morning, work very, very hard. I mean, Luan basically aced, his undergrad at UC San Diego in his Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering, goes and aces Stanford with a graduate degree in computer science at Stanford. And he and I got to know each other, and it was funny. Like, we were both married, had been married the same number of years. We both had 4 kids, and they literally were both 3 girls followed by a boy. They were literally 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in alternate year sequence. Me, him, me, him, me. And it was really kind of this weird thing. But when you talk about being an entrepreneur, it's kind of like you have to crave that success like you desire breath and oxygen. And you have to accept everything that can go wrong will go wrong. It's unfair. I heard recently, like Elon Musk, I think was on Clubhouse, which I haven't really been on, but said something effective like someone trying to get a pitch talk for being an entrepreneur. And he said, oh, if you need some kind of cheering to be an entrepreneur, you shouldn't do it. It's kind of like eating glass and staring into the abyss. And it is like, everyone's got more money. Everyone's got more resources. The markets you're going after have massive competitors. Nobody wants you to succeed. And you have to be wildly disciplined, very self-motivated. You have to be smart enough to see when things aren't working to make changes, but you have to be stubborn with conviction like we were and said, we believe native wins. We don't believe anything from the internet will port to the mobile web or mobile apps. That's hard to do. When we started Phunware, there was 2% of the world's internet traffic was mobile. Now it's 70%. Well, we thought that would happen, but it hadn't happened yet. And of that 70%, 90% of that is native iOS and Android. Only 10% would be in a, Apple Safari or Google Chrome browser on the mobile web. So you have to have this balance of, you don't want to be too late to the market because you get killed. When you're too early, if anything, Phunware has been a little bit too early to the market. Digital transformation and all in on mobile, that wasn't popular 10 years ago. It wasn't even really that popular 5 years ago. Since the pandemic, it's like you get digital transformation and mobile right, or you're dead. Like, you're just gone, because you and me and everyone else, my kids, give me what I want, whenever I want it, right now, on mobile, or go away. And you have 30 seconds when I download your app. I'm either going to delete you or I'm going to use you. And that's how it works. And with the pandemic, okay, how do I engage before I'm at this facility, while I'm on site, after I leave? And we're excited that now all those budgets that were on the sideline and all these people that thought, we've got 8 to 10 years to kind of work on a nice nuanced strategy, now they don't, right? If you're in retail and your name isn't Amazon, Target, Walmart, or Costco, you're dead if you don't figure it out, and figure it out now. If you're in hospitality, what do you do when everything's shut down? What do you do when you can't get back to the college or university? All these things are now profound. And as a result, we're excited to see the budgets that will come, the acceleration of decision-making, because the status quo doesn't work. And then all of us are getting adjusted to what's it like when, we've got 4 facilities at Phunware, nobody's at any of them. You're working remote. You're trying to get back to locations where corporations are trying to deploy initiatives, but their people aren't back yet. Some might not be back till January of next year because the lockdowns and shutdowns are kind of all inconsistent here, just like they probably are up in Canada. But life has to go on, right? I mean, we can't just sit in a hole, and you don't want to have things where you're having this massive dependency to survive on governments.
Yeah.
You want people to open their business and run their lives.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about and now I mean I'll kind of leave it with this question, and what goes into now, Phunware's been around for 10 years, a little bit longer, 12 years, but still, let's say, been around for some time now, of course, as a CEO of a NASDAQ company, what goes into that on a day-to-day, week-to-week, being the CEO of the company, of course, now, we expect that the company's grown to a certain point. You've got other people handling different parts of the business. What is your focus on a kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, just give people some insight.
Yeah, so one is always capital allocation. Every single dollar you have, where is it supposed to go? Every initiative we do, we try to encourage people to think in 10x order of magnitude. So if you're going to have a new product, how do you get the first dollar, the 10th, the 100th, the 1,000th, the 10,000th, the millionth, and just and so we try to do is prioritize research and development, and we try to prioritize sales and marketing by how do I get 10x returns on what we do. When we used to go to like trade shows before we, didn't have trade shows anymore and things like that, we would say, great, if you're going to spend 50,000 to go out to the Consumer Electronics Show and spend a week to meet with customers, partners, and do all that, how are you going to prove you're going to get 500,000 of back in 6 months? And that would be the barometer we would put things through. So we say, I focus on results, not activity. We've had to deal with our first year of being public and all the craziness behind, stock price up and down and not having free trading float and a lot of other weird things.
Well, talk me through here. Sorry to interrupt, but it's funny and love to get your insight. People talk about there's running the business and then there's running the public part of the business.
Yes.
Is it a full-time job? Talk people through, obviously not many people are the CEO of a NASDAQ company. So I'd love for you to give it some insight.
Yeah. Well, like every time I get to a Friday, I say, thank God, only 2 working days from Monday. But, it's a 24/7, 365 thing, and it never stops. And the reality is that, yes, you have to have 2 things going on simultaneously when you're public. You have to have the group that's focused on your organic and inorganic operations, how to deliver sales and marketing, both direct and indirect, how to deliver amazing performance behind it, keep high, customer retention, low customer churn, and you have to deliver operationally against what you're trying to do strategically. But meanwhile, to your point, you don't have the luxury of just doing that. You simultaneously have to make sure you are meeting and engaging the public, whether those are institutional investors that are part of index funds, hedge funds, mutual funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. So in the world of being public, you never stop engaging investors. You never stop either raising capital, whether that's debt, convertible, equity, or more importantly, even if you're done raising money, you still have to engage those funds that will be the small cap growth and equity funds. Then it's the mid cap growth and equity funds. Then it's the large cap growth and equity. So you always have this transition from angel investment early on to venture and institutional and corporate investment. Then you transition into mutual funds and everyone else. And so the other part is you have to get your story out there. You have to separate yourself from the noise. And something I learned long ago is, it's important to engage everybody when you're a public market executive, because retail investors are important and they matter, and we love having them a part of the Phunware story and the Phunware stockholder base. We also love transitioning big blocks of stock in our public float, from folks who have short-term mindsets to hopefully groups that are focused on how big can Phunware be 3 years from now, 5, 7, 10 years from now. And look, we all saw, look at a company like Amazon, right? They went 10 years trading flat.
You could buy them below $100 for 10 years.
Exactly. And then they went through another 3 years to start transitioning, and then a hockey stick. If you pick Salesforce, you could see a pattern where it didn't matter. Ring Central is a great example. For 3 years, you could have bought Ring Central at or below the IPO price, and that was still at the $10 to $16 range. And today it's going to close at probably $430, $440 a share. And you could have done way more than 10x, 20x, 30x your money by just investing in this thing no one cared about after 3 years of trading publicly. And we've seen that. Veritone, we've seen it in the last 12 months. They were trading at $1, VERI. Now they're at like $48. They went from 100 million to 1.5 billion in less than a year. And don't forget, when we went public, we were valued at $300 million. We went up to 17.5 billion, which was batshit crazy, should have never happened. Then it went all the way back down to like 20, 30 million, which should have never happened. And now we're sitting at this kind of 150 to 175 million. And honestly, that's half or barely more than half of where we started because of all the noise from going public when the float wasn't available and all the shares were locked up, followed by our reward for getting through that was a pandemic and everything stopped again. So it feels like even though we've been in business 10 years private, that were just boring, right? We were up and to the right. First 5 years, we raised $20 million. It was our own money and angels. The board was 3 founders. That was it. Then we did 2 raises. We did a $30 million institutional raise, 90 million pre, 120 million post, and a final raise before we went public at 200 pre, 250 million post, and did a slight uptick to 300 million to start trading. It was supposed to be very blah, right? We had corporate, we had Samsung, Cisco Systems, World Wrestling Entertainment, Philippine long distance telephone company. We added a sovereign wealth fund. It was super boring. And we got public, 2 years of craziness between sort of trading, float, and restrictions and lockups, followed by a pandemic. And so now, in the last 90 days, we honestly feel like this is the first time we've even gotten a chance to be a public company, to be on NASDAQ, to have something where at least the company is marginally, as a public company, resembling the actual operations of the company. Because for the first 2 years, you had the company over here and then the stock over here, and the two had nothing to do with each other, much like recently watching all the meme stocks, you know, where there was GameStop, the company, and then there was GameStop, the stock. Same thing with AMC and all these other crazy, like, so we have a real company. We have 150 million invested in a platform. We actually have 5 billion transactions a day, 300 to 500,000 per second across 800 million to 1 billion devices per month. And we're just getting started. And we laughed and said, geez, at the time, a few months back, we're like, God, you could have a 5 to 10x uptick in our stock and our valuation, and we'd basically be back where we started.
Yeah. No,
so anyone that wants to invest, we're like,
hey, you've had a good past couple months at least. I know since we started doing some of these videos with Randall, it's been fantastic. You know what? Here, we've talked for a while. All I can say is, wow, you have a lot to talk about, and we're definitely going to have you back on these videos, because it would probably have to do some with Randall. I think this has been fantastic. Alan, you crushed it. I look forward to doing a kind of Q&A video coming up here soon. I think it'd be great to maybe bring you and Randall on, and I invite anyone who made it to this point to let us know if you have questions, if you have interest in other parts of technology industries that you want us to talk about. Would love to get it in here. I know Alan can probably give some good insight, which will be fantastic. But Alan, anything else you wanted to say before I know we close things off?
Yeah, no, I mean, so we're thrilled to be able to do this. We're thrilled, as you can tell, me and Randall, we love what we're doing. We have so much we do. We know it's always going to have challenges and difficulties. We look forward to being able to do more of these. If you'll bear with me, there's one thing I'd love to just provide a tribute, if I could close on a more somber note. So the chief operating officer of Phunware, a gentleman named Hans Erickson, who was a COO, kind of two COOs before Randall. Before Randall, we had a gentleman named Scott Kenyon, and before that, Hans Erickson, who also went to West Point, was a Harvard MBA, a great guy who I had gotten to join Phunware in the early stage of our growth. His most recent job was the chief operating officer of Lenovo North America. But he had been battling cancer for years, and he passed away sadly yesterday afternoon.
Wow.
And so on a somber note, I want to say today has been a bit of a tribute on behalf of our whole company and our investors, our board, to him, his wife, and their two young children. And we never forget that life is precious, and through all the fun we have of being entrepreneurs, running companies, being husbands and wives and having kids, that there's a lot of harsh realities that still go on with it. So I just wanted to pay tribute to him here today in conclusion, on behalf of the whole Phunware family around the world, for him and his family.
Yeah, no, our condolences. And no, I think that was a great piece to end it off on. But, Alan, thanks so much for joining. I think this was an incredible video. And, I again invite anyone with questions to, let us know other things you want us to talk about in future videos. So if you've got questions or you've got some interesting insight that you want us to talk about, would love to see it. But Alan, thanks so much for joining. This was an awesome video.
Thank you very much for having me.